point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey. The amazing Tom Fennell being absent today. I have to do the whole thing myself. Tom is okay. He just was busy this morning with a move that he couldn't postpone, so I let him have the day off. Every day I go to the internet and look for news on energy and climate change and find 10 to 15 items. For each, I prepare 50, 55 word synopsis with a link to the original article. 10 to 15 of these, when I have them, are packaged together and put up on my blog, geoharvey.com, geoharvey.com. And you can go to the blog and see what's going on there. I'm sorry, I'm being a little distracted today because I've got to do the work that Tom generally does. You know, he talks about how he looks like a deer in the headlights, and the reason is because he's looking at the monitors, and I have to read and look at the monitors and operate his mouse. It's hard to operate a mouse and chew gum at the same time. Anyway, this is the 319th edition of Energy Week. The show is recorded on Thursday mornings at BCTV in Brattleboro. And today, being the 23rd of May, we will start the show on the 16th and go to the 22nd. The materials that I read, you can see at the blog, geoharvey.com. And starting on May 16th, if you want to find something on May 16th, click on that date on the calendar and you will come up to the 10 to 15 items, usually 15, that appear on that day. Now, having said all that, I'm going to go to our first item, which has got the London Array on it. This array is one of the largest arrays off the coast of the UK, and it's near London. This is the news, however, is not about London. It's actually about Connecticut. And this comes from Renews, and the title is 2 Gigawatt Offshore Wind Advances in Connecticut. The Connecticut House of Representatives voted by a margin of 134 to 10 in favor of legislation that would see the state buy or develop up to 2 gigawatts of offshore wind power. The proposed legislation now goes before the Senate for consideration. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont is in favor of this measure, and it is going to the Senate. I have looked today to see if the Senate has done anything with it. They haven't yet. But I imagine with this kind of impetus behind it, it'll probably be taken to the Senate and be successful there. There's very little opposition to this particular bill. 2 gigawatts is a lot of power. This means that the array, if it were operating at nameplate power, would have an ability to generate approximately 3 or a little bit more than 3 times as much energy as the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant did after its uprate. Wind power has a lower capacity factor than nuclear power because wind power, offshore wind, you can figure on getting about 50% of the capacity on average, where with nuclear you can get about 90%. Part of the difference is that when you have wind power, you'll almost never get nothing. When you have nuclear power, you get 90% because close to 10% of the time the plant is simply off. And it'll go off typically for about a month at a time, for refueling. So there's differences there, but this would give Connecticut quite a lot of power. I'm going to go on to the next item now, which is still May 16th. This is from Sierra Magazine. India's largest power company shifts away from coal, is the title. Tata Power, India's largest integrated power company, announced that it would build no new coal-fired plants. In India, over 40 gigawatts of coal-fired plants are financially stressed, and new additions are coming to a near halt. Peak coal capacity may be closer than anticipated. The cost of energy from coal-fired generation is very high, and it happens that the cost of energy from wind power and solar power is significantly lower. So as even with the necessity for backing it up, it's cheaper to run wind power and solar power and back it up than it is to run coal. So the coal plants are running into trouble. As that happens, the utilities are more and more reluctant to have them operating, and certainly reluctant to put money into building new ones. Tata Power, as mentioned, is the largest electric generator in India. The next item here is from Clean Technica. Let me get that picture up so that you can see it. The title here is Volkswagen continues to ramp up its electric car push. VW's Board of Supervisors announced that it is prepared to invest €1 billion, which is about $1.1 billion, in a battery cell factory. The preferred site is Salzgitter in Lower Saxony, where a pilot production of battery cells is to begin later this year. The new factory siting is contingent on negotiations with the government. The situation in Germany is a bit more restricted than it is in the United States, and for Germans to have a large new, build a large new plant such as this, which is to produce electric cars and trucks, the government really has to be involved. Well, truth be told, that is true in the United States as well. You cannot simply build a plant without the zoning board getting involved. In this case, there's probably a good deal of political will to get this particular plant going. So we can expect that it'll probably, in fact, be producing batteries and doing its work on electric, supporting electric cars. Okay, we're up to Friday, May 7th, with an item from CNN, and this particular item I will get to. Tom's not here, I keep saying we. I will get to again later in this broadcast. The title is Inslee releases $3 trillion jobs plan centered on clean energy and green infrastructure. Washington Governor Jay Inslee has unveiled his presidential campaign's jobs plan, providing details of a proposal that has a laser-like focus on combating climate change. The proposal projects a creation of 8 million jobs over the next 10 years. And the $3 million figure here is just the jobs portion of a plan that, according to the material that we'll get to in a minute, is actually expected to cost something on the order of $9 trillion. But I know that sounds like a lot of money, but I will get to that in the later portion. Okay, our next item is from Climate Liability News. Got a picture on this one. This particular picture is a beach in Hawaii, notably a beach with no plastic on it. Well, it's a beach that people go to, and in a place like Hawaii, that means that it gets taken care of. Hawaii court halts biomass plant over climate concerns. This item is from Climate Liability News. The Hawaii Supreme Court stopped plans by a biomass company to burn locally grown eucalyptus trees to provide energy to the state's largest utility. The court ruled that the State Public Utility Commission approved the plant without considering Hawaii's emission goals. Now, what's happening here is that Hawaii has got a goal of not just getting to 100% renewable power, which the plant in theory is part of, but also to reduce emissions. And the emissions from this plant are going to include carbon dioxide. You're putting carbon dioxide that's trapped in the eucalyptus trees back into the atmosphere instead of sequestering them, which would happen if you used the eucalyptus trees for a variety of other purposes. The business of getting to all renewable power was not sufficient as far as the court was concerned. They wanted to get those emissions levels down. And I think also it was not just a matter of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide going back into the atmosphere. It was also a matter of particulates and the fact that when you're burning wood, you get smoke, and the smoke has to be dealt with or you wind up having air pollution. Now, having said all of that, I'll go back to certain kinds of wood biomass facilities where the emissions are practically brought to zero except for the carbon dioxide. And you can see that this works in the fact that in the Second World War, for example, people who didn't have gasoline to drive their cars, occasionally some people converted those cars to run on cordwood. And the way that worked was that the cordwood was burned in a burner, usually on the back bumper of the car. It looked like a trash can stuck on the bumper. And the gas from that was, the combustion was partial. And the gas from the combustion included carbon monoxide, which does burn, and a variety of other combustible materials, including methane. They would be conducted to the engine where they were burned just like you burn gasoline. And these cars would drive around that way. It took a long time to get them started because you had to start a fire. And once you got to where you were going, the fire had to be put out or it had to go out or something. I wouldn't claim that that kind of thing was particularly good in terms of emissions overall because of its nature. But the point is that if you have a burn of that type, you have to have it very clean because smoke going into an automobile engine would clog it up very quickly. There were about 650,000 of those cars operating in Europe during the Second World War. Now, if you use the same technology and you put it into an electric generating station, you can get pretty good burn on, pretty clean burn on burning biomass. Okay, the next item, we're still on May 17th, which is Friday, is from ABC News, which is not ABC that everybody in the United States knows. This is the ABC News that everybody in Australia knows, which is not related. The item is called "Canberra will be the first Australian city to run on 100% renewable energy from October." The synopsis I've got says Canberra will be effectively powered by renewable energy from October 1st with completion of the third stage of the Hornsdale Wind Farm. We've talked on the show here about the Hornsdale Power Reserve. The Hornsdale Power Reserve was built in South Australia very near the, or practically at the Hornsdale Wind Farm. And that was the big Tesla battery that went up in Australia famously a couple of years ago. The interesting thing, well, I should finish reading this. It will be the first Australian jurisdiction to do so, the Australian Capital Territory's climate change minister said. Okay, first of all, for I think most Americans don't understand this, Australia has a capital territory called the Australian Capital Territory. It is very similar in terms of how it runs and so forth to the District of Columbia. And in that capital territory is a city called Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, which it makes it similar in effect to Washington. And what's happening here is Canberra, which I don't remember the population, but my inclination is to think that it's about 450,000 people. The city of Canberra is going to be powered entirely from renewable energy from the 1st of October of this year. And they are doing that by negotiating for electric power coming from renewable sources. And so they know the date. They know that, you know, the wind farm, which is basically built, almost built, is going to be in operation by then, and they will be buying the power. It's all part of a what they call a power purchase agreement. This puts Canberra, I think, as one of the largest 100% renewable cities in the world. In fact, it might be the largest city in the world to be 100% renewably powered from October. October, by the way, is spring in Australia. And that means that they're going to be running their air conditioners. In Australia, it can get hot in Australia, in almost all parts of it, with the possible exception of, well, it can even get hot in Tasmania. Okay, we are up to Saturday, May 18th, and we have a picture. I will put the picture up if I can figure out where my mouse cursor is, which I can't because, of course, everything's invisible. That is an OPT power buoy, and this particular item comes from Renews. OPT power buoy passes the megawatt-hour milestone is the title. Ocean Power Technologies' PB3 power buoy system has delivered more than 1 megawatt-hour of electricity since deployment in the Adriatic Sea in November. The company said the WAVE device has operated, quote, continuously and error-free, end quote, while being controlled remotely from its New Jersey facility. This is actually, I find it kind of surprising in a number of different ways, one of which is they've got this power buoy which is dependent on wave energy for its generating. It's being tested in the Adriatic Sea, which is not really known for its big waves. I would have expected the thing to be tested off the coast of Scotland or Ireland or possibly France in the Atlantic Ocean instead of the Adriatic. Another thing that's a little bit surprising about this is that the test is being controlled from New Jersey. And I think that this is indicative of something important, which is that you can control these things from practically any place. The third thing that I'd point out here is a megawatt hour. Now, a megawatt hour is 1,000 kilowatt hours. And 1,000 kilowatt hours is not all that much electricity when you consider that an ordinary American household that is moderately using electric power might use 20 kilowatt hours a day. And so, you know, this is a household's use this is a big household, perhaps for a month. And the wave device has not been producing all that much energy. On the other hand, this is a test. And it's a test in waters that are not particularly energetic. So we'll see where that goes. Anyway, that was from Think Progress. And perhaps I will get back here to do more progress doing something else. I'm sorry, that was from Renews. Our next item is from Think Progress. We're still on Saturday, May 18th. And what I have here from Think Progress is an article titled "Deadly Flooding is Rocking Texas. Scientists say this is our future under climate change." Across the United States, trends indicate that flooding has become the new normal. Climate scientists say it's a challenge to connect isolated events to climate change, but they have linked the wider trend uptick in rain and disasters to global warming. There are several different things that I could say about this. One of which is, you probably, most people remember that the United States had some very, very bad droughts a few years ago. The state of California was almost the entire state was in serious to extreme drought. The other states on the Pacific Ocean were in drought. Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. Huge, huge drought. Now, if you go to Drought Monitor, this is a website site called Drought Monitor NLU. I think it's Nebraska Lincoln. NUL. It's the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, but it's Drought Monitor dot, 3 letters indicating that .org, I think. But if you just say Drought Monitor and do a Google search, you'll find it. If you go there now, you'll find that there's a little patch of a moderate drought in New Mexico, but aside from that, there's a few areas. There's a lot of areas that are somewhat dry, but which is indicated by yellow, and a kind of a light orange color is a moderate drought. But there's no serious drought in the United States at the moment. Instead, you've got these floods, like floods in Texas. And what's happening here is that the trends that we have are different than they have been in the past. And scientists are in fact linking this to climate change. They're saying climate change is in fact causing this. We cannot look at a single hurricane or a single drought, tornado, storm of any kind, even a single drought. You cannot look and say this was caused by climate change. It is possible, and they have been doing this, to say this was made worse by climate change, and that is something that there's a lot of scientific evidence for. For example, if the water is warmer, it evaporates more easily. If the air is warmer, it holds more water. The air, which holds more water, goes over the land and dumps that water out because it's cooling out. The amount of water that it can dump is very much increased. And the result of that is that you had, for example, under the hurricanes a couple of years ago, you had Hurricane Harvey, for example. You had areas that were not even in 500-year flood zones in Texas that were flooded very badly. And what we're seeing now is more flooding. The business of linking this to global warming or climate change is actually fairly easy when you're talking about the overall thing. When you're talking about climate change is easy to show. When you're talking about weather, climate change is not easy to show. If you're talking about a snowball being available in Washington, D.C., that's not climate change, that's weather. If you're talking about the temperature in a place being higher than it has been in the past over a period of a year or several years, that's climate. And we've seen this in New Hampshire, where deer ticks have moved into the state because it doesn't get as cold in the winter as it used to in the past. Okay, our next item is from Clean Technica. This is a Nissan Leaf, and I'm sorry about that shot. It's the car takes up such a big part of the overall picture that I really couldn't. I didn't feel that I could run it to the edge of a TV screen and have it be seen properly. But that's the one that was with the article. The article is called "Another Electric Vehicle Benefit, No Carbon Monoxide Poisoning." Several hundred Americans die each year from carbon monoxide poisoning, and far more are made sick. A number of the deaths occurred in gas-powered vehicles where carbon monoxide can build up without the occupants knowing, because the gas is colorless and odorless. And when I was as I said, this came from Clean Technica. When I was a kid, I remember reports occasionally showing up in the newspaper about people who went to a drive-in movie, turned on the engine of the car because it was getting cold out, had their windows rolled up so there was no ventilation, and without the motion to blow the carbon monoxide away, it would seep into the engine, into the passenger into the cab, and the people died. Same thing can happen because the oil burning or gas burning furnace you've got to heat your house is not functioning properly. If it's not functioning and the emissions are not being put out properly, you can wind up having carbon monoxide in your home, which is why the rules that we have now require houses to have carbon monoxide detectors in addition to smoke detectors, because the powers that be want to have safe houses. And as this said, carbon monoxide is odorless and colorless, and fortunately now, years ago I used to work in chemical plants, and I was familiar with carbon monoxide and with cyanide and with hydrogen sulfide. And in those days, detecting carbon monoxide was not easy. And we had a carbon monoxide detector, and it was something that was unusual. Today, you can get them for relatively low cost. Okay, I'm up to Sunday, May 19th, and I have a picture here, which I will put up. That is a picture from Alaska. I think it's from Alaska. It may be from the Yukon or someplace like that, but these are crosses in a cemetery that are tumbling over because the permafrost that has been holding them up is melting, and so they don't have a good base anymore. The title of this article, the article comes from the Guardian. The title is "The Heat is On Over the Climate Crisis. Only Radical Measures Will Work." Drowned cities, stagnant seas, intolerable heat waves, entire nations uninhabitable. A 4-degree warmer world is the stuff of nightmares, and yet that's where we're headed in just a few decades. Meeting our emissions targets may seem hard. It will be far harder for our children if we don't meet them. And You know, I have to say, I'm going to click that back. Okay. I have to say, I have been looking at at news items since April of 2011. I started doing it because friends of mine at the New England Coalition asked me to just look at the news about nuclear power and send them what was going on a daily basis. And I started doing that, enjoyed it, realized I had to expand to climate change and renewable power and things of that nature. And after about 14 months later, on the 2nd of June, in fact, 2012 was when I started doing my blog. Now, the blog has a post for every day since that date in 2012. And I want to point out that I put up 10 to 15 items a day. Starting in April of 2011, I was doing the same thing by email. Not quite as many items a day, but altogether it comes to probably over 35,000 news items that I have supplied links to. Most of them, over 32,000 of them, at the blog. And I have to look at about 30 articles to find the articles that I put up for every single one of them. I've got to look at about 30 headlines. Now that means that over the period of about 8 years, I've probably looked at over 1 million headlines. And the sense that I get looking at the science, looking at the material that comes from engineering and utilities and so forth, is that we are going to save a lot of money by switching to renewables. Not even counting the question of how much we could lose by not doing it because of climate change, or even how much we could lose by not doing it because of medical expenses of people who are hurt by the pollution that happens, people who die. And in Vermont, there may be 300 people or so dying every year because of air pollution, which is not entirely from Vermont. A lot of it comes from places that are farther west. But nevertheless, we can save a lot of money on electricity, and save a lot of money on energy by converting to electric heat, electric transportation, and so forth. And the evidence is very clear. It's there. Solar power and wind power and so forth are a lot cheaper than power generated from oil or gas or coal or nuclear. And the same thing can be said for transportation. If you're driving an electric vehicle, the cost is a lot lower. I saw an estimate today that said that the cost of a lifetime cost of a Tesla Model 3 may be as low as half of the cost of some of the mid-range vehicles that it's competing against. They are not luxury vehicles. We're talking about just standard vehicles that are sold in large quantities in the United States that people think are cheaper. They are cheaper to buy, but they're a whole lot less expensive to run. Okay, I should continue on. I've got an item, the next item is from the Straits Times. The Straits Times, of course, is from the Straits of Malacca. And the item here is about Australia. The title is Australia Poll Results Divides the Nation. And this says the result of the May 28th election in Australia triggered rage and disgust for those hoping for a change in government deemed fairer and kinder to the environment. Many took to social media to express dismay after the election in which climate change was a major issue. There are people I've read commenting on this saying that the election in Australia was heavily influenced by the fact that in a couple of the Australian states, notably Queensland, the people were looking for jobs from the coal industry. And the Adani coal mine is not open, but the federal government wants to open it up, and it could create a couple thousand jobs. At the same time, one of the biggest coal miners in the world, which is in Australia, came out and said, you know, the future of coal is not what these people think it is. Well, it didn't specifically name the voters, but it's saying the future of coal is different from what many people think it is. It's not, we're going to stop using coal altogether very soon. And there's one other thing that I'd like to mention about this, and that is I've seen articles recently about a man whose name is Peter Andrews, who developed a type of farming that is called natural sequence farming. And I've been looking into that because I wanted to write an article about it for Green Energy Times. And natural sequence farming is a solution to a problem which in Australia is big, because Australia has been suffering from horrible drought. And the way that it works is water is encouraged to stay on property, even if it means that weeds are growing to do it. And in some cases, that's exactly what it means. Peter Andrews is encouraging weeds to grow. And the weeds in his case, that one of the big things that local people were complaining about a lot was willows, which, of course, around here we don't think of willows as weeds, but willows are very thirsty plants. They want to get all the water they can. And he had willows planted along a creek that ran through his property, which was very big. It was a couple thousand acres. And what happened was, because the property was getting covered with plants that were weeds, they were plants that would grow there as opposed to the plants that a farmer might want to grow there. Because of this, the ground was receptive to the idea of water going into it. So when there was a rain, the rain soaked into the ground. And the result of that was that his water table was significantly raised, and water started running through the creek off the property at a rate which was far in excess of what it had been before. So the neighbors stopped complaining and joined him in on this. And they are running organic farms in what otherwise would be desert. So the point of this is that Scott Morrison, who is the Prime Minister of Australia, was on camera going to that farm, talking about the benefits, saying that that kind of thing should be used in other parts of Australia. My hope is that the people who are complaining about him might not be 100% correct. That's my hope. Okay. So our next item here is a report from the Center for International Environmental Law. And that center has come up with that cover for the report. This is from Clean Technica. The title of the article is New Report on Plastics and Climate, the Hidden Costs of a Plastic Planet. The Center for International Environmental Law published the Plastic and Climate, I just read the name of the report. It just published this report, which says that greenhouse gas emissions associated with plastic threaten the ability, this is a quote, threaten the ability of the global community to keep global temperatures rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, plastics are something that I've been interested in for a long time, for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that I want to point out here is, if you look at the structure of wood, basically it consists of three things. One of them is cellulose, which, by the way, is a plastic. It's a natural plastic. Another thing is lignin, which, by the way, is a water-soluble thermoplastic. And the final thing is hemicellulose. And I don't know very much about hemicellulose, but if you use cellulose and lignin together, you can make plastics that are entirely natural and will break down fairly quickly in nature. I don't know, but my suspicion is that termites would eat them. They are just kind of like, very much like the natural wood that is out there, except that, of course, that the hemicellulose has been removed. We have serious problems, according to this article, with plastic. And the reason I mention the thing about wood is that there are alternatives to plastic. Plastic is a nightmare. The oceans are getting large amounts of plastic in them. Animals are dying because they can't digest food because they've swallowed plastic. And this is just getting worse. We have to stop doing this, or we're going to wind up having no fish that we can fish commercially, for example. So that is a problem. I'm going to move on here. The next item, this is Monday, May 20th. So if you want to read it, you can go to geoharvey.com and click on May 20th and find it among the things that are there. It's from Clean Technica, Unlocking the Economic Potential of Adapting to Climate Realities. Jay Inslee gets it. This is the next part of the thing that I was talking about earlier. The synopsis says, among Democrats running for president, Jay Inslee has distinguished himself with a bold zero-carbon climate plan. He says it will create 8 million clean tech jobs at a cost comparable to what has been spent in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, he's talking about a total of about $9 trillion. Apparently, we've spent about $6 trillion on those wars. And they've given us very little in the way of benefit that I think anybody can actually say. And I would say, by the way, I don't know about this business of going into Afghanistan. Afghanistan is one of several places in the world where almost anybody who invades Afghanistan almost everybody has been defeated. The only person I can think of offhand who was not defeated was Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great had some advantages that I think Donald Trump probably doesn't have. But the thing about this is the money that Jay Inslee is talking about is money that is going to be spent on things that we need. It's going to be spent on things that are covered by renewable energy that would otherwise we would have to spend money on energy sources or transmission that's not renewable. We have to make these investments, and I'm simplifying this, of course, a great deal, but I think that what I'm trying to say ultimately is that the trillions of dollars that Jay Inslee is talking about are not really all that great. The amount of money that will save us is significantly in excess of the amount that he's talking about spending. I think this is a beneficial plan that he's coming up with. Our next item is from The Guardian, and I just scrolled it off my screen, so I'm going to have to find it. Here we go. From The Guardian, and it is called Scientists Fear Impact of Deep Sea Mining on Search for New Medicines. And let me put this picture up so you can see it. Scientists who view the deep ocean and its wealth of unique and undocumented species as a prospecting ground for new medicines fear such potential will be lost in the rush to exploit the deep sea's equally rich metal and mineral resources. Well, I think basically what we're talking about here is a question of, are we going to exploit things without consideration, or are we going to be wise? And that's what it comes down to. The business of pulling metals out of the ocean floor or compounds. There's a thing that is called I forget what it's called. It's a methane trapped in a thing that looks like ice that exists on the floor of the ocean in deep levels, and they're talking about bringing that up so we'd have natural gas. And it is also believed that its sites on the ocean floor are extremely unstable, and if it's disturbed, you could have a whole bunch of it come up all at once. There are even people who are saying that that is why you have the story about the Bermuda Triangle, because ships and airplanes have been lost because of large amounts of methane suddenly appearing on the surface of the ocean. I think that we have to start getting smart, you know, and the idea that there's just one more place to get more gas, which is going to keep us being in prosperity. It's not going to be prosperous if it eventually destroys the environment that we're living in. Without the environment, we don't have a place to live. Okay, I'm going to go on. Energy News Network is the next item. And this item, the article is titled, "Maine Solar Bill Would Expand Access and Increase Net Metering Cap." I'm still on Monday, May 20th. A bipartisan bill making its way through the Maine legislature would set the state on a path to develop 400 megawatts of distributed solar energy. The legislature would allow more people to participate in community solar projects and raise caps for net metering. Energy, and this is from the Energy News Network. The governor of Maine is now a person who supports such efforts, and so the legislature is supportive of it. It looks like this is going to come to fruition. We are up to Tuesday, May 21st, and I think probably just about everybody is aware of the fact that we have had a fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. This is an item from Energy Live News. I'm going to put the picture up. That is a picture of a proposed design for a restoration of Notre Dame. And the item is called, "Could the Notre Dame be reborn as an energy positive eco cathedral?" Okay, could Notre Dame be reborn as an energy positive cathedral? Paris-based Vincent Callebaut Architects said that that's exactly how it should be rebuilt. It has released a new concept plan to repair the 8th century old Notre Dame Cathedral after the fire. And you know, I have a brother who is an expert on stained glass, among other things. He ran a stained glass workshop that specialized in making stained glass for churches. And he contacted me when he saw this and said, you know, that glass roof they've got on there is going to make it hard to see the stained glass, and it is going to be detracting from the artwork that's in the cathedral. And I look at this and I say, well, you know, that spire, which was there, was very linear, and it's now got curves leading up to it. And so he and I had different reasons, although I was aware of the fact that this would cause trouble with seeing the stained glass. I think, you know, there's a point where you should try to go for beauty. I'm not happy with this design. I know that there's probably a lot of people out there who think that it's gorgeous, but I don't think that roof goes with the flying buttresses and the other towers that are on that building. Anyway, I'm going to go on. The next item up is from Utility Dive, and it's about New Hampshire. New Hampshire legislators quintuple net metering cap by a veto-proof margin. As more states meet their net metering caps, the legislature in New Hampshire has sought to encourage further adoption by increasing the maximum amount of distributed solar capacity that would receive credit for power sent to the grid. And this, I think, is an important issue because the net metering cap in New Hampshire was a significant problem for solar developers in that state. Okay, again, still on Tuesday, May 21st, we have an item from the BBC, and here is a picture of a ship, supply ship, at an ice shelf down by Antarctica. BBC item title is Global Sea Level Rise Could Have, quote, profound consequences. Scientists believe that global sea levels could rise far more than predicted due to an accelerating melting in Greenland and Antarctica. A study says the greater melt doubles the estimated maximum sea level rise during the 21st century from 1 meter to 2 meters. Now, this is absolutely scary for some people's futures, because at a 2 meter rise, that means we would have a rise of approximately 80 inches, which is about 6 feet 8 inches, over a period of 8 decades. And that in turn means that we would be having sea level rises of approximately an inch per year. And the Army Corps of Engineers has said that Miami is basically a loss at 18 inches, which means that in 18 years, we may be in a position where it is not possible for ordinary people to be living in Miami because the sea level has risen. And there are areas in Florida, we've mentioned this before on this show, where you cannot put up a seawall. It will not work because it's built on sandstone that's porous and the water will just run right through it. I wonder what will happen to Mar-a-Lago and whether Donald Trump will live to see his precious little Florida White House die because of something that he claims doesn't exist. But nevertheless, that is the world that we live in. We are up to Wednesday, May 22nd, and I have an item here from Clean Technica about a company called Ilium. I'm sorry, not Ilium, Lilium. And I'm going to put a picture up for that. This is what is called an electric jet aircraft. And all of those little circular things you see on the bottom end of the wings are jets, which basically are really fast fans. Lilium reveals long-awaited new air taxi and celebrates maiden flight in the same swoop, which makes me think of doing something in one swell foop. But Lilium, a company based in Germany, said it is nearly ready to manufacture and operate the Lilium jet and offer on-demand air taxi service around the world. It shows a new 5-seat electric air taxi prototype whose maiden flight was earlier this month. And the graphs in Clean Technica show that this thing would actually save people not just a lot of time, but a lot of money, because the air taxis could go from, for example, Manhattan to the airport, and it would only take a couple of minutes to get there. Where, you know, a 5-minute flight would replace a 55-minute taxi drive, and it would do it cheaper. So I think we could be seeing these things, which, by the way, are electric operated, taking over some significant parts of taxi service. Okay, the next item is from Renew Economy, and the title is Osgrid Seeks to Expand Virtual Power Plant to Cut Back on Network Losses. Let me get myself up again. New South Wales utility Osgrid is seeking proposals to expand its new virtual power plant following a successful pilot project. It looked to coordinate battery storage systems to support network services and help avoid the need for further network investment. And I want to point out here, this is something that's really interesting. Part of the reason that they want to go into this business of virtual power plants is to avoid spending money unnecessarily. And how this works, it means batteries in the homes. This is basically what Green Mountain Power is trying to do. And it means that the entire business of a changing electricity demand is something that gets evened out, and it makes the whole business of supplying electricity much more predictable. And with that, it makes electricity much more inexpensive. Our final item here is from Clean Technica, and it is called Offshore Drilling Has Become a Liability for Republicans. The issue of offshore drilling has created a schism between Republicans in states where constituents depend on fishing and beach tourism. This is states like Florida and Georgia, and this is not just tourist fishing, this is commercial fishing. A schism between them and the White House, which wants virtually all U.S. waters to be open for oil industry exploitation. And what's happening here, of course, is that the White House is trying to make things as easy as possible for the oil and gas industry, for opening up every available site for exploitation so they could be drilling offshore. And what's happening in the states is that the states one by one are saying, no, we don't want that. It's a problem for the Republicans to be able to have the state Republican parties operating in concert with the National Republican Party, because they want different things here. And this is not an unusual situation, really. There have been situations like this in the past, but this is an important item. We saw this earlier in this particular show with the support that was given to offshore wind in Connecticut. That was 184 to 10, which means that most Republicans in the House of Representatives in Connecticut supported the offshore wind program, which, truth be told, the federal government could support also, but the federal government is much more interested in supporting oil and gas than it is in supporting wind power. The Bureau of Land Management and the various organizations that are involved in offshore wind at the federal level have in fact been supporting it. But now here we have an issue where the local governments just don't want to have to deal with the problems that offshore gas and oil have. And that picture obviously is Deepwater Horizon, which burned after an explosion in 2010. The Coast Guard vessels there are somewhat futilely trying to put that fire out. I don't know how they managed to do it, but it must have been really very difficult for them. So that is the program for today, and we will look forward to having Tom Fennell back next week. I'm going to put this up. This is something that I very seldom put up because we're always talking at the end of the show, but there it is. It's the theme of Energy Week. I wish that you will have a perfectly lovely week, and so I'm going to ask that you come back next time and enjoy a beautiful week in the meantime. Bye.